Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week. In the comment section on some of my previous videos, a lot of you keep mentioning Borough Frontline. I know all about the mob. They have been involved in lots of big, nasty clashes, and many firms have come unstuck against these lads. They are well respected and have a fearsome reputation. So in this video, we are going to have a look at them, explore their history, and hear about some of their clashes. If you disagree or have anything to add to the stories you hear in this video, then let us know in the comment section. Right, let's get straight into it. Borough should not have the mob they've got, wrote Portsmouth's Rob Sylvester in his book, Rolling with the 657 Crew. They must put something in the baby milk up there. That sums up how people view Middlesbrough's football firm. There are some angels to the beer belly crew, the Frontline and all the mobs in between. Borough have long had a reputation for toughness. The city was once dominated by steel mills and docks, and whilst these have shrunk or disappeared, it remains a rugged community. The old ground was in the middle of an estate of terraced housing, surrounded by alleys and dead-end streets, adding to the feeling of entrapment many visiting fans have had over the years. The new Riverside Stadium might have relieved some of this claustrophobia, but it still retains an unfriendly feel for those seeking trouble. The hardest lads stood in the Holgate end, and during the 60s and 70s dressed in red and white hard hats, long butcher's coats adorned with players' names. This mob became known as the Airsome Angels. Borough have always hated fierce rivals Newcastle and Sunderland, but also hate, as they put it, gobby cockneys, with their fancy clothes and cocky. There was no better feeling than turning over Southerners. But it was Leeds that first fell prey to this newly found Borough mob, in what has been described by one Borough lad as one of the worst beatings Borough have dished out. On the morning of the game, Borough began to start mobbing up in the Zetland pub, close to the train station. By midday, the pub was overflowing, and it wasn't long before police sirens signalled the arrival of the train from Leeds. Hundreds of men downed their drinks, grabbed whatever weapons they could, and headed out for a clash. The police were well prepared, and despite repeated attempts, Borough could not breach the police escort. The same could not be said for after the game, as Leeds were chased, beaten and robbed of their hats and scarves. Trapped between two groups of Borough, Leeds fled into a wooded park, where only a few months previous, Manchester City had also taken a hammering. Unbeknown to them, an even bigger mob of Borough were waiting. It was fairly dark, giving us perfect cover. Now it was pure carnage. Even I was amazed at what I saw. I am not talking a handful of lads here, more like hundreds, getting the shit kicked out of them. It was a massacre. From then on, the wooded park became known as Suicide Park. Not all teams were so easy to turn over. Borough may have been getting themselves a reputation among northern teams, but they were still way off challenging for the position of England's worst hooligans. When Millwall travelled up to Ayresome Park in 1970, the young and disorganised Borough firms were taught a valuable lesson from the big boys. Millwall went up the shout from just 50 Londoners into the middle of the Borough end. "You'll never take the Millwall," they chanted, arms outstretching, beckoning the home supporters forward. Few wanted to mix it with these grown men in donkey jackets, jeans and heavy boots. The return fixture was a chance for Borough to test themselves at London's best, and a mob of 300 made the journey by train, coach and van. But it was a scary sight for some of the young Borough lads. Millwall laughed at them, calling them babies and kids. During the 70s, this was the pecking order of the Borough boys. At the top of the tree was the boys from Middlesbrough and Grangetown, and they occupied the central section of the terrace. Around them stood the Bee Farm boys, Bramble's Farm estate, the Border Boot boys, St Hilda's Estate, the Park End Crew, Park End Estate, the Winniebank Boys, Winniebank's Estate, the Newport Gang and the Doggy Boys, who represented North Ormsby. Also on the Holgate End were the Redcar Reds, the Stockton Firm, the Haverton Hill Mob and the Port Boys. Other firms were the Bob End Crew and the NTP. The Bob End Crew took their name from a section of the ground, while the NTP was the initials of the three neighbouring estates, Netherfields, Thorntree and Priestfields. Usually all the mobs coexisted peacefully, united in their desire to hold it against the outsiders. But sometimes there were clashes as top boys vied for the title of King of Holgate. In 1975, a couple hundred of West Ham's finest came to Ayresome Park with a fair amount of trepidation. At a service station, the Newcastle lads warned us that Borough had a firm to be reckoned with, said Cass Pennant in his book about the West Ham firm that ICF. Borough's young lads eventually did latch on the casual fashion, much to the amusement of the older lads, who mocked them as Joeys because of their wedge haircuts. They would in turn sneer at their elders, who they referred to as the Fossils or the Beer Belly Crew. In time, the teasing stopped, as the young casuals began earning a name as the gamest and best organised of the Borough boys. Their emergence also brought together Borough's young lads, and the intergroup rivalry on the Holgate dissipated. Once the casual era and culture, it was trendy to give your mob a name, and a handful of young Borough lads came up with the name the Frontline. Paul Debrick, known as the Brick, rose from gang member to become one of the leaders of the firm. Now, I want to look at some of the Frontline's clashes with various other mobs, starting with Darlington. So let's go over a few articles and witness statements. Let's go back to the mid-80s to two Middlesbrough versus Darlington matches. One a cup game in January 1985, the other a league game in 1986, both riddled with violence, hooliganism and destruction. It was January 1985, and Borough were travelling to Darlington's Feetham's ground for a rare FA Cup clash. It was a replay following an uninspiring first-round 0-0 draw at Ayresome Park just days earlier. But it ended up being a game Borough would want to forget. Not only was it a 2-1 defeat and a cup exit, it also turned into a night of bloody violence. Missiles were thrown, police officers were hospitalised, and fans were ejected during the night of shame. Borough manager Willie Madron said he was disgusted at the behaviour of the section of Borough supporters involved. The game was stopped for 10 minutes after hundreds of Borough fans burst onto the pitch. Police were stretched to the max as the rival fans brutally clashed. There was a crowd of over 14,000, and at the end of the game, gangs fought physical pitched battles. 16 people were arrested, 12 of which were Teessiders, and a total of 72 fans were ejected from the before and during the game. And the violence didn't stop at the end of the game. Borough fans later ran wild through Darlington town centre, smashing shop windows. The mob violence erupted late into the game when Darlington went into a 2-0 lead. A section of the crowd spilled through police lines as the referee led the players off the pitch. Concrete missiles were hurled at officers, and one policeman was badly injured after being kicked to the ground. He was treated in hospital for 2 cracked ribs. Almost a year and a half later, Borough returned to the Feethams for a Division 3 league game. They won 1-0, but it again ended as a day of shame. Police believed the violence had been planned as far back as the previous season. Organised gangs fought running street battles in Darlington, causing hundreds of terrified shoppers to flee. A baby in a pushchair was even knocked over during the shameful violence. One shopper said, "All hell broke out," and said she was left petrified by actions. Described as a horror match, hooligans were armed with bleach, Stanley knives and pool balls before the derby, and some covered their faces with checked scarves. The rival supporters used slightly different designs for subtle recognition of each other. Most of the violence happened outside the ground before kick-off, but the disruption continued inside Feethams with Borough yobs ripping up 2 advertising boards and hurling pieces at opposing fans. By the end of the day, 103 people were in custody, and police found an array of deadly weapons. Police later issued pictures of some of the rampaging hooligans at the centre of the violent scenes. They are seen with their fists held high and their faces contorted in grimaces of hate as they lay into each other. In the months after, fans involved in the disturbances were dealt with in the courts. Some were jailed for their actions, as magistrates took a tough line after hearing the distressing details of the clashes. Following the match, police officers said that it was the worst scenes they had witnessed at a football game. Another incident people talk about, and one more recent, is a clash with Sheffield United. According to witness statements, this is what happened. A police officer has been taken to hospital, and children as young as 10 were injured in a brawl after a football match in Middlesbrough. Police said 200 football fans fought in a coach park outside the Riverside Stadium following the Middlesbrough versus Sheffield United game on Saturday. Disorder began just before the final whistle when Sheffield United fans invaded the pitch after their team had a last-minute equaliser disallowed. Violence continued outside the ground, leaving children terrified. 5 people have been arrested on suspicion of a number of offences and are in police custody. Cleveland police said they expected to make more arrests as the investigation unfolded. Jason Harwin said, "We will absolutely not tolerate violence of this nature, and we will work to identify the offenders and bring them to justice." The vast majority of fans accept that football is a family game, watched by children, parents and grandparents. It's terrifying for children to witness such violence or be innocently embroiled in it as their parents frantically try to keep them safe. Unfortunately, a small minority of people behave in a manner which puts innocent fans at risk, he said. Middlesbrough won the championship game 1-0. Let's finish off by listening to former Borough Frontline top lad Paul de Brick. These are all his own words, and this is what he had to say about the Borough firm. Paul de Brick wants to make it clear he's not boasting. He doesn't regret it, but he's not bragging either. All he's doing is telling it like it is. It is what happened and not what I am now, he says. All the same, he can't resist asking eagerly, "Were you shocked?" And the truth is, his story is shocking. For 2 decades he was a leading member of the Frontline, the football hooligans who followed Middlesbrough. He helped build them into one of the most feared outfits in the country, always up for an off with a rival group, and often coming out on top. His account of that time is set out in The Brick, his nickname in the Frontline. Detailing a series of offs, both home and away, the book recounts episode after episode of seemingly mindless violence as Debrick and his crowd of hooligans ran amok up and down the country. "I like the violence, just the buzz you get out of it," he says. "Violence has been a big part of my life for the past 20 years. It's the lifestyle I chose." His first taste of violence came as he watched a series of running battles between Middlesbrough and Newcastle fans at an Ayrsham Park derby. Although he was a bystander that day, it wasn't long before he was taking part. "I saw it happening and I just wanted to be part of it. It was the excitement and the buzz," he says. "It just seemed like there were a lot of people doing it. I always used to go out with older lads, and one thing led to another." Once you get bitten by the bug, it becomes a drug, and you want to do it all the time. It was like a way of life. Debrick, now 40, says each club was represented by a firm, a group of lads who wanted to fight, and the violence was always kept between firms. The rivalry between firms was intense, as each strove to be top dog, to gain a reputation as the ones to beat. Although they went to the matches, the football was largely irrelevant, Debrick admits often he didn't even know the score. The firms would either arrange where to meet for an off over the phone, or would head for the pubs where the other firm was known to drink. The hooligans recognised each other by their dress code. Stone Island, Prada among the favoured labels. You wouldn't turn up in a city centre pub full of people in away shirts and start fighting with them. That was not the done thing. They're just innocent football fans, he says. It was always football firms, like-minded lads who wanted to fight each other on a Saturday. If you didn't have an off at a football match, then you had a shit day. This code didn't extend to concern for any bystanders horrified at witnessing the violence or fearful of being caught up in it, however. It was just part of it. I didn't give it a second thought, he says. Offs weren't just confined to battles with rival football firms. Days out to the seaside often ended with a fight. Again, it was apparently only with lads who were also looking for a fight, although, again, there was no thought for how anyone else might feel. There was all the getting on a train and having a drink, but if you got off with the opposing lads, that just made the day complete, especially if you turned them over, he says. He also worked as a doorman in Middlesbrough for 14 years, giving him plenty of opportunity to get involved in more fights. I haven't picked on anyone who didn't fight a fight, he says. When I was working the doors, all they wanted to do was have a drink and kill each other. He says the stereotype of hooligans as mindless thugs is inaccurate. One of the Frontline was a London accountant, and many had good jobs, wives, children, smart houses. He says there was nothing mindless about what they did. They were lads who enjoyed fighting, who fought with other lads who enjoyed fighting. People think you're a shaven-headed tattooed person, but football hooligans come from all walks of life. Being a football hooligan doesn't make you a bad person. He's obviously proud of the Frontline's reputation. We were recognised as one of the best in the country, and I was a big part of that, he says. From an early age, putting the boot in as a kid, I was one of the top lads. We were getting a reputation for ourselves, and then we had to keep that reputation up. He says he was never seriously hurt in an off, although his jaw had to be wired together after it was shattered in a non-firm fight. But the danger and risk never bothered him. I have been on the floor and kicked. I have been punched and hit with a chair leg. It is just part and parcel of it. The first time you get a beating, if you start crying about it, you're in the wrong game, he says. He carried a knife, almost as a fashion accessory, although he says he never used it. His book recounts a number of incidents when people were seriously slashed, but Debrick has little sympathy for the victims. At the time, when you are actually part of it, you are not really bothered. I thought it was a big joke. I didn't take it seriously, he says. Debrick, who lives in Eston, East Cleveland, with wife Elaine and 2-year-old son Tommy, has given up his life of violence now. He has a good job. He works offshore as a scaffolder and felt it was time to settle down. Although he says the clampdown on hooliganism in the 1990s, better police surveillance, banning orders and stricter segregation brought an end to that life anyway. Although he's changed, he's not a reformed character. He says his only regret is getting caught. At 19 he was jailed for 2 years after a fight with Barnsley fans in Middlesbrough. He believes the hooligan element in football has never gone away. It has just been suppressed, although to such an extent that hooliganism will never come back like it used to be, he says, sounding wishful. Thank you for taking the time out to watch this video about Borough Frontline. If you disagree, agree, or wish to add anything I have missed out in the video, then let me know in the comment section. Look out for my next video. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.